Hello, friends. If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments.
I never believed in ghosts until I started flying the Pacific night routes. That's not entirely accurate. I'd spent 6 years in the Air Force, another 2 flying domestic cargo, and I'd heard every pilot superstition there was. Lucky pens, pre-flight rituals. The old-timers who wouldn't fly on certain dates or refused to say certain words over the radio. I dismissed it all as the brain's way of imposing order on chaos, of pretending we had control over machines hurtling through thin air at 500 miles per hour. I was wrong about a lot of things. My name is Ethan Cole, and 3 months ago I took a job with Pacific Meridian Cargo flying long-haul freight routes across the Central Pacific. The pay was better than anything I'd found stateside, and after what happened in my squadron, after Marcus died because I followed procedure instead of instinct, I needed distance. From people. From memories. From the part of myself that kept replaying those final seconds when I could have called the abort and didn't. The Pacific seemed like the right kind of empty. My first international route was the Anchorage-Honolulu-Guam run, a 17-hour marathon across some of the loneliest airspace on Earth. Below, black ocean stretching to every horizon. Above, stars so bright they looked like instrument lights. In between, just us and our 747 freighter, a converted passenger jet with the seats ripped out and replaced with cargo pallets, nets, and containers that rattled with every pocket of turbulence. The aircraft itself was older than I was, its cockpit a maze of switches, dials, and warning lights that glowed amber in the darkness. 2 pilot seats, worn leather that smelled like decades of coffee and nervous sweat. Behind us, a narrow galley with a microwave that hummed louder than it should, and a crew rest area with bunks that felt like sleeping in a closet. Beyond that, the cargo hold. A cathedral of darkness and aluminum, cold enough to see your breath. Lined with containers we weren't supposed to open and pallets strapped down with military precision. Captain Rourke was my instructor for the route check. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd been flying since propellers were standard. He moved through the pre-flight checks with the economy of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, his hands finding switches without looking, his eyes scanning instruments in a pattern so ingrained it was probably autonomic. We met in the crew briefing room at Anchorage at 11 p.m. The building nearly empty except for a dispatcher half asleep behind plexiglass and a janitor mopping the same spot over and over with the dedication of someone trying to stay awake. Rourke spread the flight plan across the table, a ribbon of airways and waypoints stretching across the Pacific like a tightrope. He talked me through the route, the usual stuff. Optimal cruise altitude, fuel reserves, and alternates if we needed to divert. His voice was calm, almost monotone, the voice of someone conserving energy for the long night ahead. Then just as we were finishing, he reached into his flight bag and pulled out a laminated card about the size of an index card, covered in small, neat handwriting. He slid it across the table without ceremony, the plastic catching the fluorescent light. "What's this?" I asked, picking it up. "Sky lore," he said, zipping his bag. "Read it before we push back." I turned the card over. The header read, "Pacific Meridian, Night Ocean. Route notes, unofficial." Below that, a numbered list. Rule 1, between 0210 and 03 Zulu. Do not respond to any radio call that uses your full name unless it comes on the company frequency. Rule 3, if primary instruments disagree with the stars more than once in a minute, trust the stars. Do not correct course toward the anomaly. Rule 5, Do not open the cockpit door between 0313 and 0333 Zulu, no matter who knocks. Rule 7. If you see someone walking in the cargo hold on camera at cruise altitude, they are not on the manifest. Do not let them into the cockpit. I read it twice, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I looked up at Rourke. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite parse. Not quite serious, not quite joking. "Is this a hazing thing?" I asked, forcing a smile. "For the new guy?" "It's information," Rourke said, standing. "What you do with it is your business, but I've been flying these routes for 18 years and I've never broken one of those rules. Neither has anyone else who's still flying." He said it the way you'd mention a checklist item, factual and unadorned. Then he walked out, leaving me alone with the card. I almost threw it away. Almost. Instead, I folded it and tucked it into my shirt pocket, telling myself it was just veteran pilots messing with rookies. A tradition as old as aviation itself. Ridiculous rules to make the newbies nervous, to see if they'd fall for it. But as I walked out to the flight line, the cold Anchorage wind cutting through my jacket, I felt the card's weight against my chest like something more than laminated paper. Our 747 sat in the pool of light from the cargo ramp, its white fuselage stained with hydraulic fluid and exhaust. Engines hung beneath the wings like sleeping giants. The cargo door yawned open, forklifts buzzing in and out, loading pallets of electronics, mail, and several containers marked with red seals and "Do Not Open" stenciled across them. "What's in the sealed ones?" I asked the loadmaster, a thick-necked guy named Sullivan. He glanced at the containers and shrugged. "Above my pay grade. Diplomatic stuff, maybe, medical. Could be someone's ashes for all I know. We just fly it." I did my walk around, checking control surfaces, tires, fluid levels, the ritual of making sure the machine that would keep me alive was sound. Everything looked good. Normal. The kind of normal I'd trusted my entire career. We climbed into the cockpit at midnight. Rourke took the left seat, the captain's position, and I took the right. We ran through checklists, tested systems, and called for clearance. The tower's voice crackled back, bored and professional, clearing us to taxi. As we pushed back from the gate and the tug pulled us into position, I glanced at the clock on the instrument panel. 0047 Zulu. Universal time. We'd be in the air for hours before we hit the window mentioned in Rule 1. Plenty of time to forget about the card. Plenty of time to convince myself it didn't matter. We lined up on the runway, engines spooling up with a roar that vibrated through the seat, and Rourke released the brakes. The 747 lumbered forward, gaining speed, the runway lights streaking past faster and faster until the nose lifted and the ground fell away. Anchorage disappeared behind us, swallowed by darkness and distance. Ahead, the Pacific waited, black, vast, and patient. I didn't look at the card again for another 90 minutes. By then, it was too late to dismiss it as a joke. The first 2 hours were routine in the way that long-haul flights always are. A mixture of vigilance and boredom, of monitoring instruments that rarely change and radios that occasionally whisper with distant traffic. We climbed to our cruise altitude of 35,000 feet, the autopilot settling into its rhythm, the engine noise fading into white noise that you stop hearing after a while. Below us, the ocean was invisible, just a void of darkness occasionally broken by the running lights of a ship so far below it looked like a star that had fallen and was trying to crawl back up. Above, the stars were crystalline, so sharp they seemed to cut the sky into geometric patterns. Rourke flew with his seat reclined slightly, arms folded, eyes half closed but never fully shut. I'd learned in the Air Force that the best pilots could nap with their eyes open, some part of their brain always listening to the engines, always feeling the aircraft's trim through the seat of their pants. I kept myself busy with the navigation display, cross-checking waypoints, monitoring fuel burn, occasionally keying the HAF radio to listen to the chatter of other aircraft scattered across the Pacific. Call signs from Tokyo, from San Francisco, from Auckland, all of us connected by radio waves bouncing off the ionosphere. At 0207 Zulu, I felt the card in my pocket like a hot coal. I pulled it out and read Rule 1 again. Between 0210 and 03 Nomaru Zulu, do not respond to any radio call that uses your full name unless it comes on the company frequency. 3 minutes. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting an old captain's prank get into my head. But I also found myself watching the clock, the digits rolling from 0208 to 0209, the second hand sweeping. 0210, the HF radio crackled. Just static at first, the usual atmospherics that plague long-distance frequencies. Then a voice, clear and professional, cutting through the noise with unnatural clarity. Ethan Cole, this is Anchorage Center. Confirm your altitude. My hand moved toward the transmit button automatically, muscle memory from thousands of hours of training. ATC calls, you respond. It's fundamental. You don't make them ask twice. But the voice had used my full name. I hesitated, fingers an inch from the button, and glanced at Rourke. His eyes were open now, fully alert, staring at the radio panel. "Captain," I said. "Who's on frequency?" he asked, not looking at me. I checked the HF frequency selector. The call had come through on 8831 kHz, which was close to one of the standard North Pacific frequencies, but not quite, off by a few kilohertz. "It's not exactly the right frequency," I said slowly. The radio crackled again, more insistent. "Ethan Cole, this is Anchorage Center. Your altitude is unsafe. Descend now to flight level 310, immediate." Flight level 310, 31,000 feet, 5,000 feet below our current altitude. Every instinct I had screamed at me to respond. If ATC was calling a conflict, if there was traffic at our altitude that we couldn't see, if we were in danger, you don't question it. You comply first and sort it out later. My hand closed around the transmit button. Rourke's hand clamped onto my wrist, firm but not rough. "Look outside first," he said quietly. I dragged my eyes from the radio to the windscreen. The stars were everywhere, a dome of light surrounding us. But as I focused on the ones directly ahead at our heading, I saw something wrong. The star field was bending. It was subtle, like heat shimmer on summer asphalt, except we were 7 miles above the ocean in air so cold it would freeze exposed skin in seconds. The stars ahead seemed to curve inward slightly, distorting around an invisible point, and as I watched, I realized that if we followed the descent instruction, if we turned our nose down and descended to 31,000, we'd be pointing directly at that distortion. "Jesus," I whispered. The GPS display flickered. For just a heartbeat, our position jumped, north by 40 miles, then snapped back to where we should be. The waypoints rearranged themselves for a frame, then corrected. The radio voice came again, and this time I heard something underneath the professional calm. Something that didn't sound quite human. A resonance, like two voices speaking fractionally out of sync. "Ethan Cole, comply immediately. You are endangering other traffic." Rourke released my wrist and switched the radio to the company frequency, the dedicated channel that linked us directly to Pacific Meridian's dispatch in Honolulu. He keyed the mic. "Meridian Ops, this is 417 Heavy, confirming our clearance. Any altitude restrictions we should know about?" There was a pause, the 2-second lag of the signal bouncing to Hawaii and back. Then a sleepy, annoyed voice responded, 417 Ops, negative. You're cleared as filed. Flight level 350. Why, what's the problem?" "Just confirming," Rourke said. "Did Anchorage Center try to reach us in the last 5 minutes?" Another pause. "Stand by." We waited. I could hear my heartbeat over the engine noise. The HF radio was silent now, the strange voice gone as suddenly as it had appeared. The company frequency crackled back. 417. Ops checked with Anchorage. They have shown no contact with you since your departure clearance. No one's called you. You guys okay up there? Rourke glanced at me, then keyed the mic again. Affirm, Ops. All systems are normal. Meridian 417 out. He switched back to the HF frequency, the normal one this time, and left the mic alone. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I stared at the instruments, looking for a rational explanation. Radio skip could cause strange propagation, voices from thousands of miles away bouncing into our frequency. But Skip didn't explain how the voice knew my full name, not my call sign, not co-pilot, but Ethan Cole. A name that wasn't in any ATC database, wasn't on our flight plan, and it certainly didn't explain the stars bending. What was that? I finally asked, my voice sounding thin. Rourke didn't answer immediately. He was staring ahead at the star field, which had returned to normal, the shimmer gone. When he spoke, his voice was matter-of-fact, the way you'd discuss a weather deviation. Something that wanted you to descend, something that knew which buttons to push, your training, your procedures, your instinct to obey ATC. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last. Something, I repeated. You mean someone. A hacker, maybe, someone screwing with frequencies. If you want to believe that, go ahead, Rourke said. He pulled the laminated card from his own pocket, its edges worn smooth from handling. But ask yourself, how would a hacker know your full name? How would they bend starlight? I had no answer. He tucked the card back into his shirt. The rules aren't superstition, Ethan, they're pattern recognition. Other crews learned the hard way what happens when you answer the wrong voice. We're just benefiting from their experience. What happens? I asked. If you descend? Rourke was quiet for a moment. Then, one crew did. 5 years ago. They descended on an instruction like that, at night over this same stretch. Broke contact with everyone for 8 minutes. No radar, no radio, nothing. When they came back, they were 30 miles off course, heading toward nowhere. Their fuel burn showed they'd been at full throttle, even though they swore they'd been at cruise power. And their flight data recorder had a chunk of corrupted data that the NTSB couldn't explain. But they survived, I said. Physically. Rourke adjusted the autopilot heading by a fraction of a degree. The captain quit a month later. Wouldn't say why. The first officer transferred to domestic routes and never flew at night again. Make of that what you will. I looked down at the card in my hand, the rules suddenly feeling less like hazing and more like a survival manual written in someone else's blood. Rule 1. Do not respond to any radio call that uses your full name unless it comes on the company frequency. I'd almost broken it. Almost descended into whatever was waiting at 31,000 feet in the direction of bent stars. The clock read 0234 Zulu. We had 26 minutes left in the danger window. I kept the card out for the rest of the hour, reading and rereading the other rules, wondering which ones I'd be tested on next. The Pacific night stretched ahead, empty and endless. But I no longer believed it was empty of everything. Over the next 3 weeks, I flew 6 more Pacific night routes. Each one added a new layer to my understanding, or maybe my paranoia. It was getting harder to tell the difference. I started noticing things I'd dismissed before. Radar blips that appeared for one sweep and vanished the next, always at impossible altitudes. 60,000 feet, 10,000 below sea level. Compass swings that corrected themselves before I could call them out. Lights far below that moved in patterns that didn't match any ship traffic. Too fast and too coordinated, sometimes forming perfect geometric shapes before winking out. The HF radio was the worst. Between certain hours, it felt like the frequency belonged to something else. I'd hear snippets of conversations that sounded normal at first. weather reports, position checks, but if you listened too long, the words started to repeat in loops or the voices would shift mid-sentence into tones that were just slightly wrong. Vowels stretched too long, consonants clicking like insect mandibles. I mentioned it to Rourke once. He just nodded and said, "Don't listen too long, it's like staring into static. Eventually you'll see patterns that aren't meant for you." I started following the rules religiously, all of them, even the ones I hadn't been tested on yet. I memorized the time windows, kept the laminated card clipped to my kneeboard, and found myself tensing up as each witching hour approached. Other pilots noticed. In the crew lounge in Honolulu, a captain named Frederick saw me studying the card and grinned. "Another convert," he said. "How long before you admitted it wasn't bullshit?" "About 60 seconds into my first flight," I admitted. He laughed, but it was a tired sound. "Yeah, that's usually how it goes." On my 7th flight, I met the foil. His name was Jared Martinez, Jay to everyone who knew him. And he was 28, fresh off a contract with a Middle Eastern cargo outfit, full of swagger and stories about flying through war zones and dodging surface-to-air missile alerts like it was a game. He was handsome in a way that suggested he knew it, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been seriously wrong about anything important. He joined us for the Honolulu-Guam leg, a long overnight haul across the deepest part of the Pacific. Rourke was captain again, I was first officer, and Jay was relief crew, there to take over during our rest breaks and keep fresh eyes on the instruments. During the pre-flight briefing, I did what I'd started doing with every new pilot. I showed him the laminated card. Jay read it, his smile growing wider with each rule. When he finished, he laughed, a genuine from-the-belly laugh that echoed in the briefing room. "You guys seriously buy into this stuff?" he said, handing the card back. "Radio ghosts and sky goblins? Come on, man. This is what, like folklore? Old guys making up rules so they can feel like they've got some secret knowledge the rest of us don't." "It's not folklore," I said more sharply than I intended. "I've seen..." "Seen what?" Jay interrupted, still grinning. "Bad avionics? HF skip? Instrument glitches? Yeah, me too. I flew through thunderstorms over Yemen where the compass spun like a roulette wheel and the radar looked like a Jackson Pollock painting. You know what I did? I trusted my training and my instruments, and I got the plane on the ground. I didn't need a magic list." Rourke, who'd been silent until now, looked up from the flight plan. "Suit yourself," he said quietly. "But when we're at cruise, you follow our procedures. That includes the rules on that card." Jay shrugged, still smiling. "Sure, Captain. Your plane, your rules. But I'm telling you, it's just confirmation bias. You expect weird stuff, so you interpret normal anomalies as supernatural. Classic psychology." I wanted to argue, but part of me, the rational part that had gotten me through the Air Force, wondered if he was right. Maybe I had been letting suggestion and exhaustion color my perceptions. Maybe the HF voice that used my name had been a coincidence, a controller who'd somehow gotten my personnel file mixed into the call. Maybe the bent stars had been tiredness playing tricks on my eyes. Maybe. We pushed back at midnight, the Honolulu lights falling away behind us as we climbed into the black Pacific sky. The ocean below was ink. The stars above were diamonds, and between them we flew our narrow corridor. The first few hours were quiet. Rourke and I rotated into the crew rest around O2 Anjao Zulu, leaving Jay alone in the cockpit with the autopilot and the radios. Standard procedure. One pilot could handle cruise flight while the others slept, or tried to sleep on bunks that smelled like disinfectant and old sweat. I lay in the darkness of the crew rest area listening to the engine hum, transmitted through the fuselage, and tried not to think about Jay's dismissal of the rules. He'd be fine. Rourke would be up in a few hours. Nothing would happen. At 0318 Zulu, the intercom buzzed. "Ethan, you awake?" Jay's voice trying to sound casual but with an edge underneath. I keyed the intercom. "Yeah, what's up? Can you come up to the cockpit? I want another opinion on something." The tone made my stomach drop. I climbed out of the bunk, grabbed my headset, and made my way forward through the narrow galley. The cockpit door was closed, which was normal, but as I reached for the handle, I remembered Rule 5. Do not open the cockpit door between 3:13 and 3:33 Zulu, no matter who knocks. I checked my watch. So 3:19. I was inside the window. "Jay," I said into the intercom, "I need you to unlock from your side. I can't open it from here right now." "What? Why not?" "Just do it." A pause, then the lock clicked. I pulled the door open and slipped inside, pulling it shut behind me immediately. Jay was in the left seat, Rourke's position. The instrument panel glowed amber and green, everything reading normal. But Jay's face was pale, his eyes fixed on one of the overhead monitors. "The cargo hold camera," he said. "Look." I leaned over the center console to see the screen. It showed the night vision feed from the cargo bay, grainy green on black, the containers and pallets casting long shadows in the infrared light. And walking between them, calm and unhurried, was a figure. It was human-shaped, tall, and wearing what looked like a reflective safety vest that glowed white in the night vision. It moved with a steady gait, weaving between containers, heading toward the front of the hold, toward the cockpit. "There's no one back there," I said, my mouth dry. "The hold is sealed. It's been sealed since Honolulu." "I know," Jay said. "That's why I called you." We watched the figure walk. Its proportions were wrong. Arms slightly too long, legs moving with a gait that didn't quite match human biomechanics, like someone had animated a person based on description rather than observation. Its head was tilted at an angle that would have been uncomfortable for a living neck. It turned directly toward the camera. The face was a blur of white light, overexposed in the night vision, featureless except for the suggestion of eyes, two darker spots in the glare fixed on the lens. The cargo bay motion sensor alarm chimed. Jay reached for the camera controls, trying to switch to a different angle, but the feed flickered and went static for a moment. When it came back, the figure was gone. Just an empty cargo hold, containers undisturbed, no sign that anyone had been there. "Sensor glitch," Jay said, but his voice wavered. "Has to be. Loose strap triggering the motion detector, camera ghosting." The cockpit door knocked. One knock, calm, measured. The sound of knuckles on metal. We both froze. Then Rourke's voice came through the intercom, slightly distorted by the speaker. "Hey, it's me. Open up." Got locked out checking a noise back in the galley. Jay started to unbuckle. I grabbed his shoulder. "No!" "What? That's the captain. We can't just—" "Rule 5, I said, pulling the card from my pocket and showing him. 0313 to 0333, we don't open the door, no matter who knocks." "That's insane. You heard him. He needs—" The knock came again, harder this time, impatient. Rourke's voice. "Come on, guys, what's the holdup?" But something about the voice was off. The cadence was right, the tone was right, but there was a flatness to it, like someone reading lines they'd memorized but didn't understand. I keyed the intercom to the crew rest area. "Captain Rourke, you there?" A pause. Then Rourke's voice, groggy and annoyed, coming from the bunks. "I'm trying to sleep. What's going on up there?" The knocking stopped. Jay and I stared at each other. The intercom speaker crackled with Rourke's breathing from the crew rest, and through the cockpit door there was only silence. No footsteps walking away, no apology, nothing. I pulled up the galley camera feed on another monitor. The narrow space was empty, dimly lit, and the coffee maker was sitting cold and dark. No one there. No one had been there. "Check the cargo camera again," I said. Jay switched the feed back. The hold was empty, containers undisturbed. But as we watched, the camera angle shifted slightly on its mount, panning across the space as if searching for something, even though it was supposed to be fixed in place. Then it stopped. Lens aimed directly at the cockpit door from the inside, and for just a moment I could swear I saw that white glare face in the reflection on one of the container's metal surfaces. Staring back at us, the feed cut to black. Jay was shaking. "What the fuck was that?" "I don't know," I said, "but you almost let it in." We sat in silence for the rest of the window, watching the clock tick down the minutes. At 03:34, I finally opened the door and checked the galley. Empty, normal. The pressure seals showed no sign of having been opened. Rourke came forward a few minutes later, grumpy from interrupted sleep. We told him what happened. He listened without comment, then checked the cargo camera logs. The system showed no recording of the figure. The timestamp for 03:18 to 03:25 was simply missing, as if those 7 minutes had never happened. "Equipment malfunction," Rourke said finally. "Then that's what the report will say." "But we both saw," Jay started. "Doesn't matter what you saw," Rourke cut him off. "What matters is what you did. You followed the rule. You didn't open the door. That's why we're still having this conversation." Jay didn't make jokes about the rules after that. For the rest of the flight, he kept the laminated card on his kneeboard, reading and rereading it like a talisman, and when we finally touched down in Guam as the sun rose over the runway, I saw him take a photo of the card with his phone before he left the cockpit. Another convert, another pilot who'd learned that the Pacific night held more than weather and distance. I couldn't let it go. That's the thing about seeing something impossible. It doesn't fade with time. It crystallizes. Every day that passed after the cargo hold incident, the memory became sharper, more insistent, like a stone in my shoe that I couldn't dislodge. Jay had taken to calling me between flights, late-night calls where he'd ramble about theories. Electromagnetic anomalies, mass hallucination from pressurization issues, even government experiments with holographic projection. He needed it to make sense within the world he understood. I understood the impulse. I'd spent my first week doing the same thing, researching instrument malfunction rates, reading FAA incident reports, and diving into atmospheric physics papers about ionospheric disturbances. But the data didn't support mundane explanations. It supported something else entirely. I started with Pacific Meridian's internal system, the database where pilots filed incident reports and maintenance squawks. Most of it was routine: hydraulic leaks, radio failures, cargo shifts. But if you knew what to search for, if you used the right keywords, you could find the outliers. Reports marked anomalous or unexplained, hundreds of them going back decades, all from the Pacific night routes. One from 2019 experienced loss of radar contact for approximately 8 minutes at cruise altitude. All systems functional. Upon re-establishment, the aircraft position showed a deviation of 32 kilometers from the cleared track. The flight data recorder shows a time gap. Crew unable to account for discrepancy. Another from 2016. Received ATC instruction to descend for traffic. No traffic visible on TCS. ATC later denied issuing the instruction. Voice on radio matched ATC frequency and standard phraseology. Unable to determine source. And one from 2011 that made my blood run cold. Cockpit door opened at cruise altitude despite being secured. Pressure seal intact. No explanation for the breach. Crew reported cold air and metallic smell before the door reclosed on its own. Camera evidence inconclusive. The reports were always filed, always investigated, and always concluded with variations of unexplained equipment anomaly, or atmospheric interference, or crew fatigue misperception. No one wanted to write what they actually meant. Something is out here, and we don't know what it is. I expanded my search beyond company records. The internet, for all its noise, held fragments of truth if you knew where to look. Retired pilot forums, aviation safety blogs, even Reddit threads where pilots talked anonymously about weird shit they'd experienced. One forum, Contrail Conversations, had an entire subforum dedicated to unexplained phenomena. Most of it was chaff, UFO sightings, conspiracy theories about chemtrails. But buried in the noise were threads that matched my experience. One user, call sign Old Salt Pilot, had posted extensively about Pacific routes. Flew the Anchorage-Tokyo run for 15 years. There's a corridor out there between certain latitudes where the normal rules get fuzzy. Radio calls that shouldn't be possible. Instruments that lie in patterns, not randomly. And if you're not careful, if you follow the wrong instruction, you end up somewhere that isn't on the charts. Not physically, you'll still be at your altitude, still on your heading. But you'll be somewhere else in a way that matters. The old heads call it the thin layer, the place where our airspace and something else overlap. Another user had replied, experienced this once over the South Pacific, got a distress call on 121.5 that sounded like my old squadron commander who died 3 years earlier. Voice was perfect, same call sign, same speech pattern, even the same staticky mic he always used. He was calling for help, giving coordinates. Took everything I had not to divert, checked later. Coordinates were in the middle of the Mariana Trench, 7 miles underwater. Whatever it was, it knew exactly which voice would make me respond. The pattern was clear. The phenomenon exploited training, memory, and guilt. It used voices of people you trusted or people you'd failed. It created situations designed to trigger compliance. Distress calls, ATC emergencies, mechanical warnings, all tailored to individual pilots. It was intelligent, and it was hunting. In the crew lounge at Guam during a 20-hour layover, I found the binder. It was tucked behind a row of outdated navigation manuals in a bookshelf no one used anymore. A beaten 3-ring binder with Sky Lore PM cargo written on the spine in faded marker. Inside were decades of handwritten notes, printouts, laminated cards, and photographs. An archive of the unofficial knowledge passed between crews. The rules I'd been following were there, along with additions, annotations, and warnings scrawled in the margins by different hands over the years. One section, titled Patterns Observed, read, most active between 02-04 Zulu over Central Pacific routes. Targets individual pilots, not entire crew, usually. Uses personal information. Names, deceased contacts, unresolved trauma. Cannot directly control aircraft systems, but can influence the perception of instruments. Seems limited to certain geographic areas, possibly related to the depth of the ocean below or the distance from land. Persistence increases if you engage with it. Respond to calls. Follow instructions. Open doors. Another note in shaky handwriting dated 2003. It lives in these gaps between coordinates, between altitudes, between what the instruments say and what your body feels. It tries to coax you off the charted airway. Once you're off, you're on its map, not ours. A photograph was paperclipped to the next page. A cockpit instrument panel. Everything reading normal except for the artificial horizon, which showed the aircraft inverted even though a level indicator next to it, someone's improvised backup, showed the wings level. Written below, trust your body, not the panel. Flew level for 10 minutes while instruments showed a dive. When stars reappeared, everything corrected. The final page had a list of pilots' names, 34 of them, with dates next to each. At the top of the page, those who didn't follow the rules. Most of the dates were years or decades old. A few were recent. Next to each name, a brief note. Richards, 1997, descended on a false ATC call. Found off course, crew non-responsive, retired immediately. Holloway, 2008, opened the door during the window, reported shadow in cockpit. Quit flying. Chen, 2015, followed distress call coordinates, lost radar contact for 8 minutes, never flew nights again. At the bottom, someone had added in fresh ink, Martinez, 2024, saw cargo hold figure. Didn't open the door, still flying. Jay's name. Someone had already added him to the list of survivors. I spent 3 hours going through that binder, photographing pages and taking notes. The picture that emerged was terrifying in its consistency. For at least 40 years, something had been hunting pilots over the Pacific, and the only defense was a set of rules accumulated through trial and error, each one paid for with someone's sanity or career. No one had ever reported it officially because who would believe them? Because the FAA would ground you for a psychological evaluation if you claimed something supernatural was hijacking your radios. Because the company would quietly move you to day shifts or desk jobs if you insisted that the night sky was haunted. So the knowledge stayed underground, passed between pilots and crew lounges and layover hotels, written on laminated cards and in old binders. A guerrilla survival manual for an enemy that didn't officially exist. I took photos of the entire binder and emailed them to myself. Then I put it back exactly where I'd found it, for the next pilot who needed answers. That night, lying in my hotel room in Guam, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the list of names, the pilots who'd encountered the phenomenon and been changed by it. Some had quit. Some had transferred away. Some, like me, had kept flying but carried the knowledge like a weight. I thought about Marcus, my friend who died in the squadron, and wondered if the thing in the Pacific knew about him. If it were to use his voice someday, calling me over the radio, asking me to deviate, to descend, to open a door I should leave closed. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the certainty that it would try. And the knowledge that every flight was another roll of the dice, another test of whether I'd remember the rules when my training and instinct screamed at me to break them. Outside my window, the Pacific stretched to the horizon, dark and patient. Waiting. I met Captain Lynn Tron 3 days later, though met isn't quite accurate. It would be more honest to say I hunted her down. Her name appeared throughout the binder, annotations in her handwriting, references from other pilots, and a note on the inside cover that read, "If you have questions, ask Tran. If she won't talk to you, you're not ready." I found her listed in the Pacific Meridian Directory. Captain L. Tron, Flight Operations Manager based in Guam. No longer flying regular routes, but still current, still certified. The transition from cockpit to desk that most pilots dreaded, but one that let her stay close to the operation. I waited until the end of a morning flight ops briefing, watching her from the back of the room as she walked the new hires through standard procedures, her voice calm and authoritative. She was in her late 50s, Vietnamese-American, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. When the briefing ended and the other pilots filtered out, I approached her desk. "Captain Tran." She looked up from her paperwork and I saw recognition flicker in her eyes. Not of me specifically, but of what I was. Another pilot with questions they shouldn't have to ask. "You're Cole," she said. It wasn't a question. "Rourke's been flying with you, says you're a quick study." I pulled the laminated card from my pocket and set it on her desk. "You wrote these," I said. She glanced at the card but didn't touch it. "I consolidated them, but pilots have been writing rules like that since before I was born. I just formalized the knowledge." "Why?" I asked. "Why not report it officially? Why not ground the roots until..." "Until what?" She cut me off, her voice sharp. "Until the FAA investigates and finds nothing? Until the company decides it's cheaper to fire the crazy pilots than to admit there's something in the sky they can't explain? Until someone leaks it to the media and passengers refuse to fly over the Pacific at night, tanking the cargo industry?" She stood, walked to the window overlooking the ramp where aircraft were being loaded. This isn't a problem you solve with incident reports, Cole. This is a problem you survive by learning the patterns. You've experienced it, I said. The thing out there. 30 years worth, she said quietly. I started flying these routes in the 90s, back when the rules were just folklore the old-timers muttered about. I didn't believe them either. Then I had a flight where ATC, or something pretending to be ATC, spent 20 minutes trying to vector me into a thunderstorm that wasn't showing on radar but was right there in front of my windscreen. The storm was real. The ATC call wasn't. I figured that out because the controller used my husband's name. My ex-husband, who I hadn't spoken to in 5 years and who wasn't on any crew manifest or personnel file. She turned back to face me. It knows things it shouldn't. It reaches into your life and pulls out the exact lever that will make you comply. That's when I started taking the rules seriously. What is it? I asked. Have you ever seen it? Not just effects, the actual thing. Tran's expression hardened. You're asking the wrong question. What is it? Assumes a single entity, a thing you could identify and categorize. I've never seen any evidence of that. What I've seen is a pattern of interference that suggests intelligence, purpose, and limitation. She sat back down, pulled out a notepad, and started sketching. The phenomenon, I won't call it a creature or an entity because I don't know, operates within constraints. It can mimic voices on the radio. It can influence what you see on instruments and cameras. It can create sensations of presence, knocking, temperature changes, that feeling of being watched. But it can't directly harm you. It can't override your physical controls. It needs you to cooperate. Like a predator herding prey, I said. Exactly. It creates situations designed to trigger specific responses. Descent calls for altitude-trained pilots, distress signals for anyone with empathy, mechanical warnings for by-the-book types. And it's patient. It will test you multiple times per flight, different approaches, different vulnerabilities, until it finds the one that works. Or until you refuse all of them. If you're lucky, she added another note to her sketch. But refusal has a cost. Every time you ignore a call that sounds real, every time you don't respond to a distress signal that might be legitimate, it wears on you. The doubt creeps in. What if that one was real? What if I let someone die because I was too paranoid? That's the psychological warfare. It makes you question your own judgment. I thought of the Mayday call I'd heard on my second flight, the one that used my own call sign, and felt a chill. How do you deal with that? By accepting uncertainty, Tran said simply. By acknowledging that out here you won't always have perfect information, and the cost of being wrong in one direction is survivable, while the cost in the other direction is not. You'd rather arrive safely while wondering if you abandoned someone than follow a ghost into the dark and never arrive at all. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. A new rule, handwritten. Rule 9. If the stars disappear all at once, you're no longer where you think you are. Fly straight and level for 60 seconds. Don't touch anything else. Don't talk to the radios until you see them again. That's my contribution, she said. Learned it the hard way over the Mariana Trench in 2017. Had a moment where every star vanished like someone turned off a light switch. No clouds, no storm, just absolute black above and below. The instruments went haywire, conflicting altitudes, headings spinning, airspeed showing impossible numbers. Every alarm in the cockpit was screaming at me to do something. What did you do? Nothing. I locked my hands on the yoke, kept the wings level by feel, and counted to 60. At 61, the stars came back, everything realigned, the instruments corrected themselves, the alarms stopped. We continued to our destination without further incident. And if you'd tried to correct, I asked, then I wouldn't be here to tell you about it. She tapped the rule. The thing about the rules is they're not guarantees. They're probabilities based on pattern recognition, but they're better odds than winging it. I studied her face, looking for signs of the toll 30 years of this had taken. The lines around her eyes, the careful way she chose words, the fact that she'd moved to a desk job instead of retiring outright. "Why do you stay?" I asked. "If it's this dangerous, why keep flying at all? Why not just leave?" Tran was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the aircraft on the ramp. "Because someone needs to remember," she said finally. "Someone needs to know the patterns, teach the rules, keep the new pilots alive long enough to learn. If everyone who experiences this quits or transfers away, the knowledge disappears. Then we're back to square one with pilots dying or going insane because they don't know what they're facing." She looked at me directly. "You're asking because you're thinking about quitting. I can see it. The question is whether you quit or whether you become someone who helps others survive what you survived." I didn't have an answer. She stood, gathering her papers. "You've got a Honolulu turnaround tonight, right? With Rourke and Martinez?" "Yeah." "Then here's my advice. Keep the rules close. Trust your crew and remember that the thing out there, whatever it is, has been trying to kill pilots longer than any of us have been alive. We're not going to defeat it, we're just going to keep not dying." She handed me a copy of the updated rules, including her Rule 9. "And Cole, when it uses your dead friend's voice, and it will, remember that the real Marcus wouldn't want you to die trying to save a ghost." The words hit like a physical blow. I hadn't told anyone at Pacific Meridian about Marcus. It wasn't in my personnel file. There was no way she could know. "How did you—" "It's in your eyes," she said softly. "Same look I've seen in a dozen other pilots, the ones who carry guilt about someone they lost. The phenomenon is drawn to that like a shark to blood. So be ready. When it comes to you using that angle, you'll need to be stronger than your grief." She walked out, leaving me standing in the empty briefing room with a laminated card in one hand and the weight of inevitability in my chest. That night, prepping for the Honolulu flight, I added Tran's rule to my own card, memorizing the words until they were as automatic as checklist items. If the stars disappear all at once, fly straight and level for 60 seconds. I had no way of knowing that I'd need that rule in less than 8 hours, or that when I did, it would save my life. The flight to Honolulu was supposed to be routine. That's what I told myself during pre-flight, what I repeated as we taxied, what I almost believed as we climbed through 15,000 feet into clear night sky. But the Pacific has a way of making liars of us all. We were 3 hours into the leg, cruising at 35,000 feet when the weather turned. Not gradually. The Pacific doesn't do gradual. One moment we were threading between scattered cumulus clouds, moonlight reflecting off their tops in silver waves. Next, our radar screen lit up like a Christmas tree, a line of thunderstorms building ahead of us, cells towering to 50,000 feet, anvil tops spreading like mushrooms of violence. "Well, shit," Rourke muttered, adjusting the radar tilt. "That wasn't in the forecast." I checked the weather data link. Sure enough, the system showed clear skies along our route. But the radar didn't lie. We had a wall of storms 15 miles ahead, and our current heading would take us directly into it. Requesting deviation, I called to Oakland Center, the ATC facility controlling our sector. "Pacific Meridian 417 Heavy, we need to deviate right of course for weather, approximately 20 miles. The controller's response was prompt and professional. "Pacific Meridian 417 approved as requested. Advise when able to return to the course." We banked right, threading between the cells, lightning flickering inside the clouds like neural synapses firing. The turbulence was moderate but manageable, the aircraft shuddering through pockets of rough air while the engines maintained their steady roar. Jay was in the jump seat behind us, quiet but alert. He'd been different since the cargo hold incident. More attentive, less cocky, his earlier dismissal of the rules replaced by a nervous vigilance that manifested as constant checklist checking and instrument scanning. At 0247 Zulu, we were 40 miles off our original course, still deviating around cells when the emergency frequency 121.5, the international distress frequency, the one every aircraft monitors automatically, crackled to life. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Pacific Meridian 417 Heavy. Engines 2 and 3 are out. Rapid descent, position, static. We're taking on water. Any aircraft respond, mayday, mayday. The voice was desperate, professional training barely holding panic at bay. And it was mine. Not similar, not close, mine. The same vocal patterns, the same slight rasp I got when stressed, the same way I pronounced Pacific with a hard C instead of soft. My hands froze on the yoke. Rourke's head snapped toward the radio panel. Jay leaned forward between the seats, eyes wide. The call repeated, more desperate now. This is Pacific Meridian 417. We have fire in the number 2 engine, losing altitude 12,000 feet and descending. Position approximately. The voice gave coordinates, then dissolved into static and what might have been water sounds like a radio submerging. The coordinates it gave were 20 miles off our position at an altitude of 12,000 feet, well below us. That's us, Jay said, his voice tight. That's our call sign, our flight number. That's not us, I said, forcing my voice steady. We're at 35,000, all engines normal, no fires. But the voice on the radio was still calling, weaker now. Anyone. Respond, and please, Ethan, if you can hear this, we need... It used my first name. The distress call from my own burning aircraft used my first name. The HF radio joined in, a different voice. Oakland Center or something wearing its skin. Pacific Meridian 417, we show you below radar minimum, nearby traffic, descend immediately to assist and relay. Lives at stake, time critical. Every instinct I'd developed over 10 years of flying screamed at me. Mayday calls are sacred. You don't ignore them, you don't question them. If someone is dying, you respond. But underneath that, quieter and colder, was trans warning. It uses voices of people you trust or people you've failed. We need to check it out, Jay said. If there's another aircraft in distress... There isn't, Rourke cut him off. Look at the TCAS. I glanced at the traffic collision avoidance system display. It showed no other aircraft within 60 miles. The sky was empty except for us. Could be below radar coverage, Jay argued. If they're descending rapidly, if their transponder failed. The Mayday call shifted tone, no longer generic distress. Ethan, don't do this. Not again. You can fix it this time. You didn't save Marcus, but you can save us. Just come down a little. 12,000 feet, 20 miles southeast, please. You left Marcus alone. Don't leave us. The cockpit went silent except for engine noise and the whisper of static. My hands were shaking. Every word was designed to find the nerve and twist. Marcus. The guilt I'd carried since the day he died. The microseconds of hesitation that might have made the difference. The knowledge that I'd followed procedure when I should have trusted instinct. Ethan. The voice on the radio continued, weaker, fading. You're doing it again. You're choosing the wrong thing, just like before. It would be so easy to check. Just a few minutes, a little descent, please. I don't want to die as Marcus did, alone, knowing you could have... I reached over and switched the emergency frequency to standby, cutting the voice off mid-sentence. What are you doing? Jay demanded. If that's real, it's not real, I said, my voice harder than I intended. Look at the data. No traffic, no ELT signals, no corroborating reports, and it knows my name. It knows about Marcus. How would a distress call from another aircraft know about a man who died 2 years ago in a training accident in Nevada? Jay opened his mouth, closed it. His face cycled through confusion, denial, and finally acceptance. The HF radio tried again. 417, you are required to render assistance. FAA regulations mandate. I switched the HF to company frequency only and called our dispatch in Honolulu. Meridian Ops, this is 417 Heavy, confirming our status. Any reports of distress calls in our area? The response came back after the usual lag. 417 negative. We show you in good status, on course deviation due to weather. No distress traffic reported. Why, you guys hearing something? Possible spurious emergency broadcast, I said. Investigating. 417 out. I switched back to 121.5. The frequency was silent now, just the soft hiss of empty air. Rourke looked at me, his expression unreadable. That was the hardest thing you'll ever do in a cockpit, he said quietly. Ignore someone calling for help. Was it someone? I asked. Or was it something that knew exactly which buttons to push? Does it matter? Jay said from behind us. If we're wrong, we just ignored a radio glitch or someone's idea of a sick prank, Rourke said. If we're right and we'd descended, we'd be wherever that thing wanted us to be. And based on 3 decades of pattern data, that's nowhere good. The storms closed in around us, lightning turning the clouds into X-ray images of themselves. We flew on, threading between cells, following the weather radar, ignoring the radios that whispered with voices that shouldn't exist. I thought about the coordinates the Mayday had given. 20 miles southeast, 12,000 feet. If I pulled up a chart and plotted them, what would I find? Open ocean? A patch of water where something had been waiting, hungry, ready to welcome aircraft that descended off course? I'd never know. And that uncertainty, that possibility that I'd ignored a real distress call, would sit in my chest like a stone for the rest of my life. But I'd be alive to carry it. That was the trade. Doubt and guilt in exchange for survival. It was a lousy deal, but it was the only one available. Ethan, Rourke said, pulling me from my thoughts. Check the stars. I looked up through the windscreen, past the weather to the gaps between cells where sky showed through. The stars were wrong. Not gone, but warped, like looking at them through old glass. Constellations stretched and compressed. Familiar patterns twisted into geometries that hurt to focus on. Is that atmospheric refraction from the storms? I asked, knowing it wasn't. That's us crossing into something we shouldn't, Rourke said. The anomaly wanted us to descend, to commit to the wrong heading. We didn't. But we're close enough to its territory that we're seeing the edges. Territory? Jay asked. You mean there's a specific area where the rules get thinner, Rourke finished. Where it's stronger. We're skirting the boundary. As long as we don't descend, as long as we stay on our assigned airspace, we're okay. But if we'd followed that Mayday call, we'd have flown right into the heart of it. The stars slowly corrected themselves as we continued northeast, the distortion fading like a headache receding. The storms began to break up, gaps widening, and ahead I could see clear sky and normal constellations. We'd threaded the needle. We'd refused the call. But the cost was written in the tension of my shoulders, the ache in my jaw from clenching it, and the knowledge that next time, because there would be a next time, it might use a different voice, a different guilt, a different lever. And one day, one of those levers might work. We were 6 hours into the flight, 2 hours from Honolulu, when everything went to hell. The storms we'd been dodging around had finally broken apart, leaving us in clear air under a canopy of stars so bright they cast shadows in the cockpit. I'd begun to relax, the tension from the Mayday call gradually releasing its grip on my chest. That was my mistake. The Pacific doesn't reward complacency. At 0413 Zulu, without warning, the stars vanished. Not faded, not obscured by clouds, vanished. 1 second they were there, brilliant pinpoints against black velvet. Next, the sky above us was absolute darkness, a void so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. Jesus Christ, Jay breathed from the jump seat. I looked down. The ocean below, normally invisible at night except for the occasional ship light, was the same perfect black as the sky above. No horizon line, no sense of up or down. We were suspended in a sphere of nothing. Then the instrument started lying. The artificial horizon tilted left, showing a 30-degree bank even though my body, my inner ear, my sense of balance insisted we were wings level. The airspeed indicator climbed to 400 knots, then 500, numbers that were impossible at our altitude and power setting. The altimeter unwound, showing us descending through 30,000 feet, even though the vertical speed indicator read 0 and the seat of my pants said we weren't moving. Warning alarms blared. The stall warning clacked, the overspeed warning howled, both simultaneously screaming contradictory emergencies. The GPS display flickered between nonsense coordinates, showing us over Nevada, then over the Arctic, then displaying coordinates that didn't exist on any map. Attitude indicator failure, Rourke called out, his voice tight but controlled. Switching to standby. But the standby instruments showed the same impossible data. We were inverted, climbing, descending, and in level flight all at once, depending on which gauge you believed. The HF radio crackled with that too-smooth voice. Pacific Meridian 417, you have attitude indicator failure. Initiate corrective bank to heading 090 and descend to flight level 310. Trust your instruments. Your spatial senses are compromised. It sounded perfectly reasonable. Spatial disorientation is one of the most dangerous conditions in aviation. When your body's sense of balance disconnects from reality, leading pilots to fly perfectly good aircraft into the ground because they believed their senses instead of their instruments. The standard training is drilled into every pilot from day one. Trust your instruments. Always trust your instruments. But these instruments were insane. They couldn't all be right. And if they couldn't all be right, which ones were lying? The autopilot tried to pitch down, responding to the faulty altitude data. I felt the yoke push forward against my hands. Autopilot's trying to dive us, I called out, fighting the pressure. Disconnect it, Rourke ordered. Manual flying. I hit the disconnect button. The yoke went dead in my hands, no longer fighting me, but also no longer helping. We were hand-flying now in a sky with no reference points, with instruments that showed impossible contradictions. The synthetic voice from the warning system announced, bank angle, bank angle. Then 2 seconds later, overspeed. Then stall, stall, stall. My training screamed at me to do something. Correct the bank, level the nose, reduce power, add power. Every instinct demanded action. And then I remembered Tran's rule. If the stars disappear all at once, fly straight and level for 60 seconds. Don't touch anything else. Captain, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, I'm flying straight and level, not correcting anything. Starting 60-second count now. Rourke looked at me, his face illuminated by the insane instrument lights. And for a moment I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. Then he nodded. I'll count. You fly. You can't be serious, Jay said from behind us. Look at the instruments. We're in a 30-degree bank, overspeeding, altitude's unwinding. The instruments are lying, I said, gripping the yoke with white-knuckle force, keeping it neutral, refusing to make any input. I'm flying by feel. Wings are level. Power is steady. We're not turning. 10 seconds, Rourke said. The artificial horizon showed us fully inverted now, flying upside down at 600 knots. The altitude tape showed 20,000 feet and dropping. The stall warning wailed. The overspeed warning screamed, and underneath it all, the HAF radio voice continued its calm litany. 417, you are in an unusual attitude. Recover immediately. Roll right, Pull back. Descend to a safe altitude. Trust your instruments. 20 seconds. My arms shook with the effort of keeping them still. Every fiber of my being wanted to roll right, to correct the dive the instruments showed, to do something other than sit here like a statue while alarms shrieked that we were dying. The cockpit lights flickered. The temperature dropped, breath condensing in the air. Through the windscreen, the absolute darkness seemed to press against the glass as if trying to force its way inside. 30 seconds. The radio voice changed, lost its professional veneer. Ethan, move the controls. You're killing everyone. You're doing it again. Marcus died because you hesitated. Are you going to kill Rourke too? Jay, move the controls. 40 seconds. I could feel my grip loosening, my muscles preparing to act despite my brain screaming at them to stop. The human body isn't designed to sit still while it thinks it's dying. Every evolutionary instinct demands motion, correction, fight, or flight. Hold, Rourke said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Hold the yoke. Hold the heading. Hold. 50 seconds. The darkness outside began to swirl, patterns forming in the black like oil on water. I could see shapes in it, faces maybe, or the suggestions of faces, hollow-eyed and hungry, pressing against the windscreen. The cargo door rattled. Footsteps sounded in the galley, metal on metal, walking toward the cockpit. 55 seconds. Something's in the plane, Jay said, his voice breaking. I can hear it. It's right outside the door. The cockpit door handle rotated, slowly, deliberately, testing. 60 seconds, Rourke said. I kept my hands locked on the yoke, kept my feet steady on the rudder pedals, kept breathing even though my lungs felt like they were in a vice. 61. The alarm stopped. The darkness outside thinned, then shattered like black glass. The stars reappeared, brilliant and normal in their correct constellations. The horizon line resolved itself. Ocean below, sky above, the line between them sharp and clean. The instruments stabilized. Artificial horizon, wings level. Airspeed 285 knots, normal for our weight and altitude. Altimeter 35000 feet, exactly where we should be. GPS, showing our actual position 1,500 miles from Honolulu on the correct airway. The HF radio fell silent. The temperature returned to normal. The door handle was still, the latch secure. We were flying straight and level, exactly as we had been for the past 61 seconds, through a sky that had never changed except in our perception and in the instruments that something had corrupted. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the normal hum of engines, the whisper of air over the fuselage, the quiet electronic chirps of functioning systems. Status check, Rourke said finally, his voice hoarse. All systems. I scanned the panels. Everything's green. All instrumentarias normal, no warnings. Traffic. TCS clear, no contacts. Weather? Clear skies, radar's clean. Rourke leaned back in his seat, his hands trembling slightly. Log it as a transient instrument anomaly due to atmospheric interference. Nothing more. That wasn't atmospheric interference, Jay said quietly. That was something trying to kill us by making us think we were dying. I know, Rourke said, but that's what the report will say. Because the alternative is admitting something exists that we can't explain, can't fight, and can't escape except by having rules that sound like superstition. I looked at the laminated card still clipped to my kneeboard, at Trans Rule 9, the one that had just saved our lives. If the stars disappear all at once, fly straight and level for 60 seconds. 60 seconds of doing nothing while everything screamed at you to act. 60 seconds of trust in a rule written by someone who'd survived the same test. It almost worked, I said. Another 10 seconds and I would have moved the controls. I would have corrected toward whatever it wanted me to fly into. But you didn't, Rourke said. That's the difference between us and the names in the back of Tran's binder. We remembered that sometimes the right action is no action. That sometimes survival means ignoring every instinct you have. We flew the remaining 2 hours in silence, each of us processing what had happened. When Honolulu appeared on the horizon, its lights like a constellation brought to Earth, I felt relief so profound it was almost painful. We landed in clear morning air, the sun rising over Diamond Head, the world solid and real and gloriously mundane. But I knew as the wheels touched tarmac and the thrust reversers roared that I'd crossed a threshold I couldn't uncross. I'd looked into the dark between the stars and seen something looking back, and it had seen me. The official incident report took 45 minutes to file and said almost nothing. Flight experienced transient instrument anomalies at 04 with 13 Zidids, while at cruise altitude FL 350, position N32.4 W156.7. Multiple systems showed conflicting data for approximately 1 minute, then self-corrected. No aircraft damage, no injuries. The flight continued to the destination without further incident. Recommend full avionics diagnostic during next scheduled maintenance. I sat in the crew debriefing room at Honolulu, watching Rourke type the report with the weary efficiency of someone who'd written similar lies dozens of times. The words on the screen were technically accurate and completely useless. They described what happened without explaining anything that mattered. The maintenance crew would run diagnostics and find nothing. The avionics would test perfectly. The flight data recorder would show a brief period of noise in the sensor data, easily attributed to electromagnetic interference or a software glitch. There would be no evidence of the darkness that swallowed the sky, no recording of the voices on the radio, no proof that we'd spent 60 seconds flying blind through something that wanted us dead. Jay sat across from me, his face pale, holding a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He'd been silent since we landed, processing. I recognized the expression. I'd worn it myself 3 weeks ago after my first encounter. "You okay?" I asked. He looked up, his eyes hollow. "I used to think flying was about physics. Lift, thrust, drag, weight, cause and effect. Predictable." He laughed, a brittle sound. "Now I don't know what the hell it's about." "It's still physics," Rourke said, not looking up from the computer. 99% of the time. But there's that 1% out over the deep ocean where something else has a say in the outcome. That's what the rules are for, to navigate that 1%. "And if the rules don't work?" Jay asked. "If it finds a new angle we don't have a rule for?" "Then someone learns the hard way and we add a new rule," Rourke said flatly. He finished the report, signed it and stood. "Get some sleep. We've got the return leg tonight." "Tonight?" I said. "We're not getting a day to—" "We fly the schedule," Rourke interrupted. "We always fly the schedule. You start avoiding routes because you're scared, you might as well quit now." He walked out, leaving Jay and me in the debriefing room. "Is he right?" Jay asked quietly. "Do we just keep flying as if nothing happened?" I thought about Tran, about the pilots who'd logged decades over the Pacific, about the names in the binder who'd quit or transferred or quietly retired to desk jobs, about the choice between running and staying. "We keep flying," I said, "but not like nothing happened. We fly knowing what's out there, and we follow the rules." Jay nodded slowly. "I'm updating my card, adding everything from tonight." "Good idea." We sat in silence for a while, then Jay spoke again, his voice barely audible. "When the darkness was outside the windscreen, when it was showing those shapes, did you see faces?" "Yes." "Did any of them look familiar?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He'd seen them too. The faces that knew which features to borrow, which memories to exploit, which dead friends to imitate. That night, lying in my hotel room with the curtains drawn and the lights on, I tried to sleep and couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the sensation of flying through nothing, of instruments lying, of alarms screaming while my hands stayed locked on the yoke. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You did well. LT. Tran." Somehow she'd already heard about the flight. Or maybe she'd just known we were due for a test, the way you know a storm is coming by the pressure change. I texted back, "How many times have you gone through that?" The response came a minute later. 7 times in 30 years. It gets easier to recognize but harder to endure. The doubt never goes away. Is it worth it? Staying? A longer pause this time, then. "You tell me in 20 years. Get some sleep, Cole. You've got another flight tonight." I didn't sleep. Instead, I pulled out the laminated card and added my own note in the margin. Rule 10. If you survive by following the rules, don't second-guess the decision. The doubt is part of the attack. It survives by making you question whether you did the right thing. At some point before dawn, I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of HF static coming from my phone. I grabbed it, heart pounding, but the screen showed no active calls, no apps running. The sound stopped as suddenly as it started. I got up, checked every window lock, looked through the peephole into the empty hotel corridor, and finally convinced myself it was just a nightmare echo. The kind that follows you from flight deck to hotel room, from sky to ground, from the Pacific night into supposedly safe spaces. But as I stood in the bathroom splashing water on my face, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. Just for a frame, just long enough to register that wasn't my reflection. Taller, wrong proportions, eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. When I spun around, the bathroom was empty. I flew the return leg that night with Rourke and Jay. The flight was clean. No radio ghosts, no instrument failures, no missing stars. Just a normal cargo run across the Pacific, the kind you'd file and forget. But I kept the card out the entire time, and I noticed Rourke doing the same. His copy clipped to the sun visor where he could see it without looking down. A reminder of the rules that stood between us and something that didn't have a name. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a routine. I memorized the rules until they were reflexivex. I updated the binder in the crew lounge with my own notes, my own experiences, adding to the collective knowledge. I started recognizing the other pilots who'd been through it, the ones who kept laminated cards, who tensed up during certain time windows, who checked the cargo cameras obsessively even when the hold had been empty since departure. We were a tribe, bonded by experience that couldn't be explained to outsiders, maintaining a guerrilla resistance against something that didn't officially exist. I thought about quitting. Every flight I thought about it. But every time I considered turning in my resignation, I'd think about the next pilot who'd take my place, some new hire who wouldn't know about the rules, who'd hear a voice using their name and respond, who'd see something on the cargo camera and open the door. So I stayed. Not because I was brave, but because someone had to remember. Someone had to pass the knowledge forward. One night, 3 months after my first Pacific flight, I found a new addition to the crew lounge binder. A laminated card, freshly printed, with 9 rules in familiar handwriting and a 10th in my own. Rule 11. If you make it through the night, write down what you learned. The pilot who comes after you might need it. Underneath, someone had started a new list, those who followed the rules and survived. My name was third from the bottom. Jay's was second. At the bottom in fresh ink was a name I didn't recognize, Naomi Fields. The next generation was already learning. The Pacific night would test them as it had tested us, as it had tested pilots for decades. Some would break, some would quit, some would learn. And those who learned would keep the knowledge alive, one laminated card at a time, one flight at a time, one night at a time. Because the alternative, forgetting, dismissing, ignoring, was a death sentence. and whatever was out there hunting in the gaps between stars and altitudes was patient enough to wait for the next pilot who forgot the rules. Naomi Fields found the card during her second day at Pacific Meridian, tucked into the company folder they'd given her with her route assignments and crew schedules. She was 27, fresh from a regional airline where the longest legs were 90 minutes, and the biggest danger was bird strikes during landing. The Pacific routes were a step up, better pay, international experience, the kind of resume builder that could lead to major airlines. The card confused her at first. She read it 3 times, waiting for the context that would make it make sense. Pacific Meridian, Night Ocean. Route notes, unofficial. Rule 1, between 0210 and 030. Zulu, do not respond to any radio call that uses your full name unless it comes on the company frequency. Rule 3, if primary instruments disagree with the stars more than once in a minute, trust the stars. Do not correct course toward the anomaly. Rule 5, do not open the cockpit door between 0313 and 0333 Zulu, no matter who knocks, and so on. 11 rules total, each one stranger than the last. She almost threw it away, almost convinced herself it was pilot humor, hazing for the new hire, someone's idea of making her nervous. But something about the way the rules were written, precise, clinical, devoid of jokes, made her hesitate. This didn't read like hazing. It read like a survival manual. Her first long Pacific flight was scheduled for Thursday night. Honolulu to Guam with Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Cole. She'd looked up their records, both experienced, Rodriguez with 15 years at Pacific Meridian, Cole with 6 months on international routes but a solid Air Force background. She showed the card to Rodriguez during pre-flight. "You guys really follow these?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Rodriguez studied the card, his weathered face unreadable. "You'll hear stories," he said finally. "Read them anyway. Up there, it's better to have too many checklists than not enough. But it's just sky lore, right? Pilot superstitions?" "Maybe," Rodriguez said. "Or maybe it's pattern recognition from pilots who've been flying these routes longer than you've been alive. You'll make your own call on what to believe." She wanted to ask more, but something in his expression shut down the conversation. This was information he'd give when she was ready, not before. Ethan Cole was friendlier, greeting her with a handshake and a tired smile that suggested he'd been flying too many nights in a row. He looked at the card when she showed it to him and nodded. "You'll want to read that before we hit cruise," he said, "especially rules 1, 5, and 9. "Why those specifically?" "Because those are the ones we get tested on most often." "Tested by..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "By situations that don't fit the standard operating procedures. Anomalies. You can call them equipment malfunctions if that helps, or atmospheric interference or confirmation bias. Doesn't matter what you call them as long as you follow the rules when they show up." They pushed back at 23:45 local time, the Honolulu airport lights falling away behind them as they climbed into Pacific darkness. Naomi took the jump seat for the first leg, learning the route, observing the crew's rhythms. Rodriguez flew with the practiced economy of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Cole seemed more alert, more vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning instruments and sky in a pattern that suggested expectation rather than routine monitoring. At 02 Zulu, Naomi felt the atmosphere in the cockpit change. Nothing obvious, no one said anything, no alarms sounded, but both pilots sat up straighter, their attention sharpening. "That card," Rodriguez said without looking at her. "You got it handy?" She pulled it from her pocket. "Yeah. Read Rule 1 again, out loud." She did, her voice sounding thin in the quiet cockpit. "Between 0210 and 030 Zulu, do not respond to any radio call that uses your full name unless it comes on the company frequency. That window opens in 8 minutes. Cole said. During that time, if you hear your name on the radio, your full name, not your call sign, don't touch the transmit button. Don't respond. Wait for one of us to handle it. Why would... Because something out here likes to use names, Cole interrupted. And if you answer it, you permit it to keep talking. We don't permit it. Naomi wanted to laugh, to dismiss this as veteran pilots messing with her. But the way they said it, matter of fact, like discussing a checklist item, killed the laugh in her throat. At 0212 Zulu, the HF radio crackled. Naomi Fields, this is Pacific Meridian Operations. We've got an urgent reroute for you, weather update. You're going to want to hear this. The voice was professional, calm, exactly what company ops should sound like. But Cole's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist before she could reach for the transmit button. Which frequency? He said sharply. She checked. HF, but it's off by... Don't respond, Rodriguez said, switching to the company frequency and calling. Meridian Ops, this is 417 Heavy. Confirming you tried to reach us on HF just now? The response came after the usual lag. Negative 417, we haven't called you. Something wrong? The unauthorized HF frequency crackled again, more insistent. Naomi, this is urgent. It's about your brother. There's been an accident. We need you to acknowledge so we can relay information. Her brother, her twin brother Marcus, the same name as the Marcus that Cole had mentioned in hushed conversations with other pilots, the friend he'd lost. How did the radio know she had a brother named Marcus? Her hand moved toward the transmit button again, an automatic emergency response to family, to the one thing that could cut through training and procedure. Cole's grip tightened. It's not your ops, he said quietly. It's not your brother. It's the thing that knows which voice you'll answer. Don't give it what it wants. She stared at him, her mind reeling. How does it know his name? I don't know, Cole said. But it knows mine too. It knows everyone's. That's why the rule exists. They flew on in silence while the HF radio whispered with her name, with variations designed to provoke response, urgency, then sympathy, then anger at being ignored, then fading into static. At 0258 Zulu, the transmission stopped. Naomi realized she'd been holding her breath. She exhaled slowly, her hands shaking. What was that? She whispered. That was the easy test, Rodriguez said. The one where you're prepared because you've been warned. The harder tests are the ones you don't see coming, where it uses angles you didn't think to guard against. How many tests are there? As many as it takes to find your weakness, Cole said. But here's the thing. Every test you pass makes you stronger. Every rule you follow adds to the data set. Eventually, you learn to recognize the patterns before they fully form. And if I fail, then you join the list of pilots who quit or transfer or quietly retire to ground jobs, Rodriguez said. Or you become one of the stories they tell to warn the next generation. But you don't die, Cole added. That's the strange mercy of this thing. It can't actually kill you. It can only trick you into killing yourself, flying into conditions or attitudes that become unrecoverable. If you refuse to cooperate, if you follow the rules, you survive. The rest of the flight was clean. No more tests. No instrument anomalies. No missing stars. Just a long, dark haul across the Pacific until Guam's lights appeared on the horizon and they descended into warm morning air that smelled like rain and jet fuel. During the debriefing, Rodriguez handed her a fresh laminated card. A duplicate of the one she'd found, but with more wear, more handling. The edges softened by countless flights. Your card now, he said. Keep it close. Add to it if you learn something new. And when you're ready, when you've logged enough hours to know this is real, you pass the knowledge forward. That's how we survive, by remembering what the pilot before us learned. Naomi took the card, feeling its weight disproportionate to its size. It was just laminated paper, just words and numbers. But it was also a lifeline, an accumulated wisdom of pilots who'd faced something inexplicable and lived. That night in her hotel room in Guam, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the voice on the radio, the one that knew her brother's name, that knew exactly which words would make her want to respond. She pulled out her phone and Googled variations of Pacific Ocean pilot strange radio calls and unexplained phenomena aviation Pacific. The results were sparse. Forum posts dismissed as fantasy, Reddit threads where pilots shared stories that read like creepypasta, a few conspiracy blogs that mixed legitimate experiences with obvious fiction. But underneath the noise, she found the pattern. Decades of pilots reporting the same types of experiences, using the same cautious language, all over the Pacific routes. It was real, not mass hallucination, not equipment failure, not psychological projection. Something lived in the space between sea and sky, and it hunted using the tools of aviation itself, radios, instruments, procedures, against those who flew through its territory. She opened her notes app and typed, Rule 12. If it knows things about you it shouldn't know, that's how you recognize it. Personal information, dead relatives, private fears. These aren't in any database. When the radio knows too much, it's not the radio anymore. She'd add it to the binder next time she was in the crew lounge. Let the next pilot benefit from what she'd learned. Because that was the job now. Not just flying the routes, but maintaining the collective memory. The oral tradition of survival passed between crews who'd seen what shouldn't exist. She thought about Cole, about Rodriguez, about all the pilots who flew these routes night after night carrying their laminated cards and their knowledge, standing watch against something that had no name but infinite patience. They were the guardian generation, the ones who remembered. And now she was one of them. Outside her window, the Pacific stretched to the horizon, dark water beneath a darker sky. Somewhere out there, other aircraft were threading through the night, their pilots watching instruments, monitoring radios, following rules written by people they'd never met. And somewhere in that darkness, in the gaps between coordinates and altitudes, something was waiting, testing, probing, patient. Naomi set her alarm for 6 hours, knowing she wouldn't really sleep. The card sat on her nightstand, visible in the ambient light from the window. Tomorrow night, she'd fly again. And the night after that. And the night after that. Because someone had to. Because the Pacific routes needed pilots who remembered. Because the alternative was letting the knowledge die, letting the rules fade, letting the next generation fly blind into darkness that knew their names. She closed her eyes and listened to the silence, knowing it wasn't really silent, knowing that out there in the electromagnetic spectrum things whispered that shouldn't have voices. But she also knew the rules, and the rules were enough. They had to be. End.